Today, we're digging into a really profound question, one that gets to the heart of how our leaders, and really all of us, are behaving on the world stage. And this right here is the core question for this entire explainer. This isn't about left versus right, or this country versus that country. This goes way deeper. It's an investigation into the actual logic, the operating system that's driving global events. Are we being led by something like a conscience? Or is it all just cold, hard calculation? Because right now, if you look at the evidence, it really seems like global leadership is running on exactly this kind of machine logic. The inputs are things like fear, economic shortages, population stress. The tools being used, well, those are sanctions, propaganda, military alliances. And the goal, the desired output, it's dominance. There's just not a lot of soul in that equation. And that is where you get this fundamental disconnect, this huge fracture. While the people in charge are operating with this cold, mechanical logic, the argument here is that the rest of us, regular citizens, haven't actually lost our souls. And that split, well, that's the central conflict we're going to unpack today.
Okay, so let's move from the philosophical down to the ground level. We're going to take a look at some of the world's biggest flashpoints, but not through the usual lens of flags and slogans. We're going to look at them through the harsh reality of cold, calculated interests.
Let's start with Greenland. The headlines might talk about buying an island, but the machine logic sees something totally different. It sees control over brand new Arctic shipping lanes that are opening up. It sees massive stashes of rare earth minerals, the stuff that powers the phone in your hand, and it sees a critical piece of military real estate. This isn't some abstract political game, it's a resource game that directly impacts all of our lives. And this gets at a much bigger point about all these global alliances we see. They aren't really about shared values or some kind of deep friendship. They're more like temporary business deals, fragile arrangements of convenience. And that fragility is exactly why we seem to be stuck in this state of permanent cold conflict, just escalating from one proxy war to the next. Or take a look at the bizarre paradox between Russia and Europe. On the surface, the slogan is simple: they're enemies. But the reality, it's this tangled web of mutual dependency. Europe still needs Russian energy, and Russia, believe it or not, probably needs Europe's markets in the long run more than it needs China's. This isn't about morality. It's a kind of hostile codependence. And that's exactly why this conflict just drags on and on. Neither side can afford a total win or a total loss. Now let's pivot to another huge flashpoint: China and Taiwan. The rhetoric you hear is incredibly heated, right? But what's really going on, for now, is more of a war of nerves. It's a strategic standoff, not yet a shooting war. So why all this focus? Well, nationalism is a big part of it, for sure. But the second reason is absolutely critical: semiconductors. Taiwan has a stranglehold on the world's most advanced chips. These are the brains of everything: our AI, our weapons, our entire global economy. You control the chips, you control the future. And a third, scarier reason: with China's economy slowing down, some fear that conflict could be seen as a kind of defibrillator, a way to jolt the system back to life. The cost of a real war over these chips, though, would be catastrophic for literally everyone. So what about a rising giant like India? Well, it's playing a very different kind of game. You could call it strategic silence and selective alignment. This means they're happy to join security talks with the US and its allies, but at the same time, they're keeping strong economic ties with Russia. See, India is just too big, too complex, with too many of its own massive internal challenges to become a simple pawn in someone else's chess match. All right, so we've seen the examples on the ground. Now let's pull back and look at the game itself, the underlying system. Why do all these different global players end up acting with such a similar machine-like logic? The answer is simple. The rules of the game are set up to reward it. And this is just so important to understand. It's really tempting to look for the good guys and the bad guys, but that's a distraction. The US talks about a rules-based order while often benefiting from chaos. China talks about peace while aggressively expanding its control. These aren't just moral failings of leaders, they are logical responses to a broken global system that actually encourages this exact behavior. To really get a sense of this system, let's just look at one number: $38 trillion. That's roughly the national debt of the United States. I mean, it's a number so huge it almost stops meaning anything. Which brings us to the most obvious question in the world. How? How is that even possible? How can any country operate with that kind of debt without just instantly collapsing? The answer has nothing to do with being morally superior. It has everything to do with structural power. It's basically held up by these three pillars. One, the US dollar is the world's go-to currency. Two, and this is the wild part, the more fear and instability there is in the world, the more people rush to the dollar as a safe investment. So chaos actually helps. And three, all of this is backed up by overwhelming military power, which kind of enforces trust in the whole system. You see, it's a structure, not a virtue.
And the fallout from a global system like this, it's felt most brutally in the places the machine just ignores. Look at parts of Africa, where centuries of exploitation have left behind weak institutions. These places then get flooded with weapons and proxy wars, which creates these endless cycles of desperation that, frankly, make populations easier to control. This isn't an accident. It's a feature of the system's design. So if the system itself is the problem, can we actually fix it? Let's shift from diagnosis to prescription. And these aren't just pie-in-the-sky ideas. They're practical reforms aimed at putting some of that soul back into the machine.
First off, we have to completely change how we measure success. Our current standard, GDP, actually goes up when there's a war or a pandemic or some huge natural disaster. It's insane. Imagine if we replaced it with something like a human survival index, a metric that actually tracks the things that matter: mental health, food security, a stable environment, trust in our community. What else could we do? Well, we could take AI and demilitarize it, use it to predict famines instead of building killer drones. We could have a global debt jubilee, but tie it directly to real cooperation on climate change. We could all agree that basic things like food, clean water, and medicine should never be used as weapons. And ultimately, we need to decentralize global power, money, tech, weapons, and the stories we tell, so that no single country can hold the whole world hostage. And all of this brings us right back to where we started. It brings us back to this fundamental choice we have to make, a choice between our own humanity and the giant, complex systems we've built, a choice between real wisdom and just raw intelligence.
In the system we have right now, our leaders are hunters. They are rewarded for tracking down advantages, for cornering resources, for achieving dominance. And the nations themselves are trapped in this logic, forced to act as both the hunter and the hunted, constantly either on the attack or looking over their shoulder.
And in this great global hunt, who's the prey? We are, the citizens, the actual human beings who are just caught in the gears of these enormous, unfeeling machines. But here's the twist. Here's the little sliver of hope. The problem isn't that humanity has actually lost its soul. No, it's that we've outsourced it. We've handed our collective conscience and our wisdom over to these massive power systems, and we just hoped for the best. And so the final, most important question isn't about who wins the next election or the next battle. It's this: can we, as a species, reclaim that wisdom before our own unchecked intelligence finally destroys us? It feels like a monumental task, I know, but the first step is always the same. Just understanding the game, seeing the machine for exactly what it is, that isn't a passive act. That is the beginning. Because seeing the world clearly is, in itself, an act of resistance.